Liberia's Ellen Johnson Sirleaf to Malawi's Joyce Banda and Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma in the African Union, many African women have defied rhetoric and achieved what was once unimaginable, influential leadership roles. But while Africa has made strides in addressing gender inequality, current women leadership maintains that there is still much more to be done to break the tide of discrimination and disempowerment. So then, what more can be done to further the agenda of women on the continent? And what progress has already been made by Africa's women leaders? I'm Beatrice Marshall. Welcome to Talk Africa. Now, the African Union's Agenda 2063 aims to fully engage women and the youth in particular towards the goal of actualizing the continent's development and prosperity. However, the African woman still faces a number of challenges in various areas, particularly in ascending to the roles of decision-making in society. Let's take a look at the status of women leadership in Africa.
The election of Ellen Johnson Sirleaf as Africa's first female president was praised by many as a new dawn for the woman's role on the continent. Hers was a victory not just in the Liberian elections of 2006, but also for African women rising into leadership roles. 6 years later, Joyce Banda assumed power in Malawi, becoming the continent's second female president. And in 2015, Amina Gurib was voted as President of Mauritius by the country's National Assembly. At the African Union, Dr. Dlamini-Zuma has been at the helm of the AU Commission since 2012. But critics argue that's as far as the question of African women in leadership goes, a matter of numbers. While the recent election of women to top governance points to a growing shift from an otherwise male-dominated landscape, many challenges make it exceptionally difficult for the African woman to ascend to power. Education of the girl child remains a pertinent issue, with more than 50% of girls in 47 countries on the continent not being able to access secondary education. Early pregnancies and child marriage also contribute to this plight, making the question of women's empowerment even more difficult. Globally, 1 in 5 girls is denied a chance at education due to poverty, violence, and gender discrimination. In light of this growing concern, the African Union declared 2016 a year of particular focus on women's rights. The continent's Development Blueprint Agenda 2063 targets to achieve holistic empowerment of women by the year 2030. But even as Africa struggles with significant socio-economic and cultural challenges, Rwanda, Senegal, and South Africa currently feature among the world's top 10 parliaments with the most women representatives, perhaps indeed signifying a change in tide. Maria Galang, CCTV.
The African Women's Leadership Symposium is a regional platform that brings together women of power and influence occupying various decision-making positions recently held in Nairobi. The participants are women from diverse spheres of influence, and the symposium allows them a space for open dialogue, reflection, and engagement on how to tackle gender inequality and power imbalances on the African continent. Well, I sat down with thought leaders on the subject on the sidelines of the event to get their views. Our guest today on the program, Winnie Byanyima. She's the Executive Director, Oxfam International. The Honorable Olubanke King Akerele. She's a former Foreign Minister of Liberia. And also Amina Mama. She's the Professor and Director, Women and Gender Studies at the University of California. To you all, welcome and thank you very much for being on the program. Winnie, I'm going to start off with you on this segment. Africa's women leaders are holding a symposium here, the first one, and they are discussing access to influence, access to power, and access to resources for women, which means there is a major challenge. What is the challenge?
We're looking at our continent and examining the quality of leadership. We're actually not trying to access resources. We're looking inward at our own resources as leaders. What can we do that would change the lives of women and children? And we are women here from different backgrounds. Women from politics, from business, from academia, from government, from farming, grassroots women, and all of us are leaders in our spaces, and we're looking at how we can make a difference because our continent is in crisis. So we're saying, what can we do that will change this?
Ulubanke, what can women do that will change this then?
Well, let me say the foremost thing I do want to put on the table, and there's a tendency to forget, 1985 Nairobi Conference, International Conference on Women. It was extraordinary, and a lot started here, building on the Mexico Conference, building on Netherlands, Copenhagen. Women came here in Kenya in 1985, the International Colloquium on Conference on Women. For me, my particular interest is what I call growing the next generation of leadership on the continent. That is my passion, because that next generation has to benefit from our generation. Hence the importance of what we call in Liberia sitting on the old mat to plait the new mat. The next generation has to benefit from those experiences that we have to take us forward. So as part of that experience, this issue of resources, my suggestion on this is that we have African millionaires, women and men. We have the Dangotes. We have the most highest African billionaire, I think she's from, is it Mozambique? Angola. Let us get those women billionaires on the continent to come and put in the resources to help us do what we need to do.
I mean, I'm going to draw in from what Ulubanke has said here, and she's talked about going back to 1985. There seems to be a tendency of a lot of talk then since 1985. How much progress has been made?
Oh, a great deal of progress has been made. I have to say that it's not due to our millionaires. In fact, I have a real case against them. Firstly, how they got to be millionaires. They might be able to ameliorate some of that if they put their money to good cause. And as a member of the women's movement that has indeed burgeoned since 1985, I have to say they are not the people who have helped. A forum like this is actually about bringing, as Winnie said, bringing women who've been in this movement for a long time together with relative newcomers, and it's really to consolidate and to share, you know, what has been gained, what have we achieved, what have been the pitfalls, what have been the mistakes, what have been the worst moments for individuals and collectively, and how we've overcome those. So it's really like a skill building, typical movement forum in that respect.
What is it you hope to change though? What aspects is it that you're hoping to change?
Well, one thing we must contribute to is to make peace on this continent, to bring peace. People are moving because of conflict. People are dying. So we need to discuss how we can contribute to that. There are also new threats. We're seeing violent extremism and peaceful communities being shattered because of new forms of threats. We don't even yet have a language and a handle on it and approaches to how to contribute to peaceful resolution. So we need to talk about that and bring it into our movement and have solutions for it. So that's one of the big questions. There are others too, but I'll let my colleagues speak.
Let's hear from Ulubanke then.
Well, on the issue of women, peace and security, I'm pleased to point out that we have initiated from Liberia that is now been adopted as a best practice by the African Union, the concept of what is called the Women's Situation Room. The Women's Situation Room is not a physical room, but it is a process by which women of Africa are now getting involved and engaged in very serious peace-building efforts where we are now part and parcel of the political mainstream. And it starts basically with the electoral process. Most of our countries, at elections time, come violence. So it's a process of before, during, and after elections. And it involves women in high-level mediation, not only limited to women, but involving women and youth and the nation as a whole. And this is a process that can be adopted and applied elsewhere. As I said, it's coming out of the Liberian experience, where the women of Liberia, by the time we're going to the second elections, we realized there was a potential for violence. And we, the women, said, no, we will not sit down and let this happen. We galvanized the women, we galvanized the youth, and we established this quick action response as elections are happening. So you try to take preventive actions to minimize the violence. And this is an approach at the country level that has now expanded, been adopted in a number of other African countries. And in fact, it has been recognized by the UN Security Council. We have a resolution on that. So there are new approaches that we believe that can now be adapted, and it's happening. So we're very excited about that.
I mean, let's look at that whole question of political mainstreaming for a start. And when I looked at the Symposium program, one of the issues that women are talking about is access to influence. But the perception now is women do actually now have equal access to education, equal access to finance, perhaps. What is the hindrance, though?
Well, first of all, I don't think we're quite there. Women get access to microcredit and small income projects, and a few get onto boards, but we're not in command of the resources of the continent, which are still largely being expropriated with the complicity of men. So I'd like to see women having much more equal access to resources. But coming back to the question you raised about what has been gained, what have we achieved? I think a lot of that is in the sphere of politics. I mean, Rwanda is the world's #1. More than half, 68% women elected from grassroots level, not just affirmative action, not just appointed in. So that's huge. I mean, before that, there were only the Scandinavian countries up there. So not all countries have that record, but quite a few have significant numbers of women in politics. So I think if you look at the top 10, quite a few of them are African countries. So we've made gains there, but why we would now be talking about leadership is that everyone now realizes that while getting the numbers in is important, it's not enough. It's not enough to have a critical mass. That mass must be critical. And that means they must have a critical understanding of why women and men are not equal, and a critical understanding of how women are still living, because the access to power hasn't yet resulted in the kind of transformation in ordinary women's lives that feminists in particular hope for. So it's tended to produce a small elite of women. Some of them are excellent, but something happens when they get into the structures of power that hampers that connection with the movements through which most of them gained their political skills.
And we can draw from the example of Liberia here, with the president there being a woman, as well as former president of Malawi having been a woman, and the current African Union Commission chairperson being a woman. Are we seeing women now scaling the heights? Are we seeing more availability of that access?
No, I wouldn't be so optimistic, because you're counting numbers, a woman here and a woman there. There's a long way to go. There's a long way to go. If you look at political processes in our countries here, the way to enter politics is filthy. It is about using a lot of money. It's about using violence to get elected. This is not the route through which we want to have to select our leaders, because it's the one with the most money, stolen money. It's the one with the most violence who gets chosen to lead. And no wonder our continent is in crisis. So we need to change the rules of how we govern ourselves and how we choose our leaders. So we're looking for women through meetings like this who are committed to transformation, to changing the rules of society, not merely to win by the rules and be part of the same filthy game. So there's a lot of hard work to do. The meeting we are having here is part of that. The hard work, the rejection of dirty rules, unfair rules, the visioning of new rules, and committing to bring about change.
Lubenke, what's been the experience though of Liberia?
Well, let me say, following on what you just said, is this. I think there is no question that the fact that you have these women who have attained the highest is an important model and mentorship for others, okay? The fact that we produced a first African woman president meant a lot to a lot of women. In fact, what was interesting is that African women began to refer to Madam Ellen Johnson as our president. She's our president. So that ability to identify with that woman leadership, and then you had Malawi. Okay, now, what I must say that is critical to the point that Winnie's just made, is that those women presidents and leadership then must bring on, you need a critical mass of women in the positions to work with and help to do the kind of transformation you're having. When I was Minister of Commerce and Industry, right, what was important was that there were other women ministers in different key posts with whom I could work. This is critical. You cannot on your own as a minister of this or a minister of that affect the major change. You need others to work with you. And so I think this is an important aspect of responding to the issue that Winnie has just made, that there may be a tendency to forget the linkages, or that you have to maintain those linkages. But this is where you work together with a team. So we must assure that more women are there in your system, not just the president, but then she must have women in key posts. When I was Minister of Commerce and Industry, the Minister of Justice was a woman. The Minister of Finance was a woman. That was a critical dossier with which to work. So this is important, but indeed we still have a lot of work to do.
I mean, yes, go ahead.
I was just going to say Liberia with a woman president isn't very different from Nigeria, which has never had a woman president. We both have very few women at the next level. And it's a sad thing. It shows how difficult it must be, even when you have a woman president, to actually get more women into the parliament, because the societies haven't changed just because there's a woman there. So I would say that it's a step, as she shared, but it's far from the answer. I mean, you could have a good man. There have been good men in presidencies who've done, like, you know, in South Africa. But it wasn't just down to the president. It was because they had a strong women's movement and a progressive head of state that they were able to develop a much more progressive constitution.
Where does legislation, though, come into play here? Is there room for legislation?
Yes, important. Legislation is important, because when you make a law, everybody must obey. Many times the law is actually a tool for changing the informal norms, the way people believe and conduct themselves. So when you say that, when you make a law against, say, female genital mutilation, then it won't stop right away, but those who are practicing it as a culture and believe that it is good, first know that it is wrong, then they know that they are wrong on the wrong side of the law, then they know they can be punished, and gradually they can be persuaded that it is not the right thing to do. So legislation is important. On this question of women's rights, of women's political voice, we have used constitutional quotas in Uganda. In this part of the world, we've used them a lot. In Tanzania, even in Rwanda, we've used constitutional quotas. Now, but by making it a law, it happened, so women came in. But in addition to coming in, after some years, we are seeing that it has become a norm in society. Nobody even makes a wedding committee anymore of just men. You must have women on it. Or a burial committee, you must have women in it. So it's become part of the culture that women are part of every committee, and that having one woman is tokenism. You must have more than one. So this is to do with starting with legislation. It transfers into the social norms, the beliefs of a society. So legislation is important. And that's why some of us champion quotas, although in some other countries they are resisted. Here they've actually finally put it in the law books in Kenya, but they are struggling to implement it.
And I was going to raise that query about Kenya's situation, because they are still struggling to implement that gender law. But how then do you accelerate the process?
You know, sometimes we need to keep having a long-term perspective and looking from where we're coming from to where we're going. Some years ago, I used to use a piece from the Hansard of Kenya as a training material with women in many parts of Africa. And this was just quoting verbatim different members of parliament here debating a domestic relations bill. And men were saying the most terrible things. One man even said, "Why should I not have sex with my wife whenever I want? This thing of marital rape is ridiculous. Kwa sababu nimenunua," meaning I have bought her. Why would I not have sex when I want it? This was the mentality like 20 years ago. But today, no man will stand up and say that. So even with this quota thing, 20 years of fighting for it in this country, now it is there. It might take another 2 years to get it implemented, but they'll get there. So it's about looking at the journey and celebrating every win and continuing. And that's why we meet like here.
Right. Lubanke, I just want to get your view on that whole cultural aspect that Winnie has raised, and I know you have a point to add.
I think it is so beautiful and it is so real. Let me tell you, today in Liberia, we are having trouble with our men accepting this quota thing. They can't even understand why it should be. So here we are, Africa's first woman president, our legislatures, we are fighting with them today on this very issue. And I agree with her, you have to get the legislation, because once you get the legislation, as she said, look at the spin-off. Look, it happens and it will come and it will happen. And the experiences of what's happening in other countries is what we are demonstrating to our people. But you have to do this. So it is a critical first step. It is a necessary condition. It is not a sufficient condition. But by demonstrating and showing in other countries what is happening, and the discussion she's saying is real. And so we must continue that and build on such efforts. And that is why I went back to 1985 Nairobi. And the point I was making there is not that billionaires helped to get us where. All I was saying is to help us in the future. Let's tap some of those things. I agree with you, the issue of where the money is coming from is the one issue. Okay, but we're talking.
Spend it well.
Yeah. But but we must get them. We must get them to realize that they have an obligation to help us. But I totally agree with her. That is the struggle we're having in Liberia, where Africa's first woman president is.
Do you still think the patriarchal system of Africa is still an issue?
Very much so. I mean, Nigeria, they won't even talk about a quota. I think back in the 80s, we tried to introduce minimum 30% for women. First of all, Nigerian women said, why 30? We want 50. But what men said was women are overdeveloped. Now, this is going back to the culture. It is true, we come from a woman-affirming culture. The problem is that actually the modern system has often pushed back. We've worked mainly in law and policy, whereas the problems very much persist at a community level, and then men in leadership call on culture and tradition. In Nigeria, we have I want to say, notorious senator who reversed the law against child marriage that women had fought for decades. We got a law banning child marriage. He went to Egypt, came back with a 12-year-old bride, and persuaded the Senate to overturn the law. And this is quite recent. So we do keep working on the law, and we must. But it has to be a sustained struggle, because there are these reactions. And I would suggest when you have a woman president, the reaction may be even more than if you just have men and say, oh, we must, are you with me? So it's multi-layered, and the struggle has to happen at all layers. I think law has been really important in terms of changing the political space, but only in a minority of countries. So others can follow that example. But at another level, the law has been less effective, and that is around issues of sexuality, child marriage, female genital cutting, because of the way in which men and women who believe in patriarchy will insist that this is our culture, this is our tradition.
I'm going to get a final comment from all of you as we wind down. So as you wind down the symposium, as you discuss the issues at the symposium, which issues do you think the African women leaders should be prioritizing, and which issues do you think Africa should be prioritizing?
This is a meeting for introspection, no? For being self-critical and building our own leadership. So I'm not looking for any commitments on public issues from this meeting, but I'm hoping that we will come out of this meeting, each one of us, first of all, inspired to keep leading and changing and improving lives. And I want us to be more self-critical and come out with each one a commitment on how to use the space they have more deliberately to change the situation for women and girls. It's commitments, it starts from within, and we come here really to build ourselves as leaders.
Right, Olubanke?
Well, I will not repeat what she said because I believe in all of that. But what I'm looking for, what I want to come out, because I want to share this perspective with the rest of the meeting, is what I call growing, developing and promoting the next generation of African leadership. And that's male and female. Male and female leadership. That's what I want us to come out, for us to realize that we have to grow it, and we want to grow that leadership with a certain mindset, a certain perspective, and not to just concentrate only on the next generation of women, but the next generation of the men also. So that is what I think, and a lot is coming out of this meeting that is showing that we need to continue to empower our women who don't have this exposure, so that they themselves can know that they have a critical role to play in moving forward.
Amina?
What I can say from the conversations we've had already today is that it is leadership, so in support of what they're saying, but I would add that what I'm hearing is really a transformative idea of leadership. As Winnie said at the very beginning of this conversation, we have leaders from slum communities, we have leaders from rural women's associations, so we've broadened the level of leadership, so it's no longer just about politicians, but in a sense, everyone in their own sphere can play a leading role. And the second thing is that I think that it's able to be transformative, that is, make a more systemic change, because women are working collectively. We have over 120 women in the room, and you're finding out who helped who every minute of the conversation. So it is about collective leadership as opposed to, the great individual savior, because that clearly doesn't work. We get individual dictators. So the transformative model is to actually ensure collective, collaborative leadership, and this is something women are absolutely expert at. Leading from below, leading from behind, and leading collectively.
I must thank you all for your insight. Amina Mama, Olubanke King Akerele, and Winnie Byamima, thank you very much for your insights today.
Thank you. A pleasure.
And that's all we have time for this week on Talk Africa. Remember, you can join the conversation online through Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. And do join us again next week for another edition of the program. Goodbye.